Hey crafters, Big D here, and this week we are making bases. I know we did a video on bases a couple weeks back, but I've been doing some stuff for Warhammer 40k, and I've been posting some of my figures, and I had a lot of questions on how I do my bases. So I'm going to show you how to do two kinds of bases. One's going to be more of like a swampy, and it's a smaller style base that I use for my cultists and my zombies and my poxwalkers. You can use it for anything you want, just like a small swampy base. The other one I'm doing is kind of very specific to my Death Guard. These are really kind of nasty and gross. I got a lot of questions on Reddit how I do these. Now I'm going to send a link below to Miscast terrain. Big shout out to him. These are actually his design. I just kind of modified it. Same basic idea. I'm doing a little bit different coloration, and I'm kind of sticking to the same thing over and over. So big props to him. Big shout out. I love you, man. And I'm going to show you how I did my bases for both my Death Guard and the rest of my unit. So let's hit the table. Okay, so we are making swampy, gross, weird alien bases. And I'm going to show both my more demanding and kind of larger, fancier method in a little bit. The first thing we're going to show is my simpler method, which is what I use for like zombies, and I use them for my poxwalkers, and I'm going to use them for my chaos cultists. So I came up with this idea for my Death Guard army for 40k, but you could use them for just zombies or just anything you want to make it look sloppy and icky. So we're going to start with this one. You're going to need three things to make this base happen to start off with. Now notice I don't have this primed. I don't need it primed. We don't need to have the figure or anything. We just need to make the base the way it is. So I have a piece of wire, and this is going to be used like a rake to spread stuff out on here. The other thing I'm going to need is liquid super glue, not gel. You need the liquid stuff that spreads nice and easily, which is what we're going to be spreading with this. And then baking soda. Normal, ordinary, regular baking soda. And it's basically done in 3 layers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to put some liquid super glue on the base. And spread it out so it's nice and even. Okay. Then we're going to take some baking soda and just kind of sprinkle it and it's okay if we get a couple heavier spots. You'll see in a minute why. Okay, so tap the table a little bit, and then you're going to put another drop or 3. And then you're going to take a little bit more, and you're just going to put a little bit more on top. Not a lot. Okay. You could take a junky brush and you can brush it off, but this is pretty much the amount of texture you're doing. So I'm going to take this and do it to all your bases that you're going to do this to, and then when it's done, you're going to take your primer and you're going to spray them. I've got a brown primer, and I'm going to spray them brown right off the bat. If you've just got a white or a black or a gray primer, go ahead and spray them with your primer and then paint them brown. And then we'll come back and what we do after that. Okay, so we've got our bases. Our brown is dried and our glue is dried, and it's just a nice kind of muddy textured looking base. So I'm going to take just a tan. I'm just using Craftsmark, just tan, and I'm going to give them a pretty heavy dry brush. Alright, so here we go. 9 bases, all painted and dry brushed. You could use them just like this now. If you were doing something you wanted more of a Marsy or a deserty base, you could maybe give them a little bit of a red wash or a reddish wash. Or if you wanted to give them a little bit more of a lush area, you could kind of give them some green wash or whatnot. Way we're doing it, we're going to take a little bit of a dark brown wash, and we're just going to give them a touch of it. Not a ton, but just a little bit, just to give them a little bit of color to add some tones to it. Okay, now you can see with that darker brown shading, you're really now starting to pick out some really great details on it. Now the last thing I'll do before I let them dry, I'm going to take a dark green shade and I'm just going to touch some of the highest points. Okay, so now we've got our green on there, and we're going to let these dry. And with these dry, the colors are going to seep and kind of back off a little bit, and then we'll be ready for the last step. So we'll come back after these completely dried. Okay, so we've let them sit overnight, and they have dried, and there is our shading. And so now the last step of the regular paints, we're going to take a light green, a light olive green. I'm actually using Games Workshop's Nurgle green, and I'm giving them another faint dry brushing, just so that it picks up my corners and my edges. Alright, crafters, so here we've taken our bases, we've let them dry. I actually put a ring on them, and I gave them a satin coat to make things look a little wet. And so now they're ready for their final step. The final step is this magical stuff. It's called Nurgle's Rot. Citadel produces it. It's a heavy gloss medium, but it's this kind of an icky green color, and it's semi-translucent. It looks just like rotting goo. I mean, there's really no other way to describe this stuff. And so you just gotta kind of look at your bases, see where the low points are, and then take a brush and just kind of paint in the lowest points on the base. Now, if you want it to be really gross and really fetid, you could do multiple layers. It'll make the green thicker, and it'll make the green more opaque. So you can't really see the texture and the stuff underneath it. And that's definitely an option. On the other hand, I'm just going for just to kind of make things look gross, because these are the bases for my poxwalkers. So again, you're not glopping it on super heavy. Put it on in thin coats, and that way you can get the level of opacity and sickness and rot you want. But just use a brush and just kind of follow the flow and ebb of the shapes you've made. And every single one of these bases will be unique and disgusting. And if you're doing Death Guard or you're doing swampy stuff, that's the look you're going for. So just kind of fill in the lower blanks, and there you go. So this is where you start, this is what you end up with. Like I said, if you want it to be thicker, you want it to look grosser, go ahead and just put another coat on, do a couple coats. It will fill gaps, it will edge up, and it does look really nasty. So I'm going to do the other 19 of these bases, and we'll come back at the end and see what they look like, and then we're going to move on to the other bases we're doing. So back for the half the tutorial in just a minute. Alright, crafters, so for this second kind of base, this is the more detailed base, the ones that I've gotten actually the more questions about. I'm going to need, again, 3 things for this. You're going to need your base. In this case, this is a standard GW 32mm base. You're going to need a comb, and we'll explain the comb later. And you're going to need some modeling epoxy. I'm just using good old-fashioned Miliput. So what we do is we've got our mixed up Miliput. We're going to take a little bit of it aside, because we're not going to use it all just for the flat part of the base. We're just going to take it and we're going to mush it on. And you're not going to mush it on too thick, so the stuff that comes off, you're going to, again, set some of it aside. But then when you've got a little bit of coverage, I mean, maybe a couple millimeters thick, maybe about as thick as, say, 2 or 3 pennies, you know, not crazy thick. You're not putting a huge glob, but you just want to have enough that it will make some nice indentations in terrain when you make the marks on here. So we've got it on here, and I got a piece on there. We're going to take a little bit of water, and I'm just going to smooth it and make sure we get it off the lip, because we want all this base to go on the actual surface of the base. And then we're going to smooth the top out. Now the bases I make pretty much per figure, and since I want these to look unique in every way, and I want these to look a little smushy, and you'll understand when I say smushy in a minute, I'm going to take a figure. So I'm actually making this for my caster. So I've got the base, I haven't even primed or anything yet, but I just want to get an indentation where he's going to look good on the base. So I want to put him, and I want to put him down and wiggle his feet a little bit and get a good idea of where his feet are going to be. And yeah, it's looked a little squished in because we want this to look kind of wet and squoochy, you know, and that's an actual word, squoochy. We want it to look nasty. So then now that we have this, and we've taken the water and smoothed it out, we're going to take a paintbrush. We're going to take the rounded end, and we're going to make some holes. And you kind of want to spread these out. You don't want it to be just nothing but holes, but at the same time you don't want to underdo it. You want this terrain to look nasty. Now you can also take a slightly smaller one and put some secondary dents and holes in there. Basically, you want this to look pockmarked. You want the ground itself to look diseased. So now after you've got those marked again, we're going to put the feet back on where we saw, and we're just going to wiggle them in place again to re-emphasize where those foot marks are. So this is what the ground is going to start off as. Now just remember the figure you made for the base. Take it set aside. You're going to build that figure later. But now, with the remaining Miliput, we're going to do a couple things. First off, we're going to make a couple little balls. And we're going to put those balls in a couple of the holes. And so we're making pustules, or I don't know, you could call them fungus balls, or again, pustules, whatever you want to think they are. I know how I'm going to paint them, so I kind of want them a little bigger. I want them to stick out. I want it to look gross. I want people to look at this, and I want them to get uncomfortable when they see the grossness of this. So there, we got 3 little pustules on there. And then we're going to take the rest of this Miliput, and we're going to roll it into kind of a fat snake, because now we're going to take it and we're going to rub it on our comb, which will lengthen it. But it's going to put that lovely worm segment pattern on there. And you just want to kind of pick a spot on the base. And just kind of wrap it on there. Now I try not to go too hog wild with the worms. I do a couple, no more than 1 or 2 per, and I always try to make them different. I think one of the things that's really nice about these bases is because every one of them is going to be a little unique, because they're not coming out of a mold, they're not coming out of a press, they're not coming out of something you've sculpted and you're just casting over and over. They're going to be unique. So you want to get like some of your character's mentality there. Now, if you've got it in place and you don't like that it's not, you don't think it's segmented enough, you just take the comb and rotate it over your worm. And there you go. Now, you just got to let your Miliput dry. Whatever you're using, if you're using Miliput or you're using some sort of other epoxy clay, let it dry for its regular amount. In this case, I'm going to let this set for about 24 hours. I can typically actually go for 12, but they say 24. I go at 12, 24, depending on when I can get back to it. The first thing you're going to do when you do is, because you don't really need to prime this, just give it a coat of a tan paint. Just a light brown, just the whole thing coated in tan, so it'll give it an almost pallid flesh tone, and then we'll come in and we'll give it the rest of the paint job after it's dried. Okay, crafters, so you see I've got a couple of them here. I've got that tan on there, that's nice and dry, it's kind of like flesh color. You might also notice I've put a couple skulls on here. I went and got a box of these. These are really, really great, just for throwing skulls here and there in the terrain. And on these bases, because I want them to look all gross and death, I put them on there. So now we're just going to paint them, and I'm going to go through the process I do. So the first thing as I do is I take a bright pink and I will paint the worms bright pink. Alright, crafters, so we've got our worms all pink, and now we're just looking at these little fungal balls that we put on here, and I usually paint them kind of a dark green. So that's the last of the fine detail that we're going to paint. Next, we're going to get some light green and just kind of a junky brush. In this case, I'm using Citadel's Nurgle green. And I'm using a fairly wet brush. And to be honest, I'm just kind of smearing it randomly. Just introducing some green to some portions of it. Then you gotta let this dry, and we're gonna start with the heavy washes and ink back. So give this a minute, give it 10 minutes or so to dry, and then we'll come back. Alright, so we let our stuff dry, and now we're just gonna get to the wash ink shade stage. I like a lot of color, and I think having lots of various color looks good, especially for these grossness. So what I do is I take various levels of Beal Tan Green, or just any sort of a dark ink wash. And again, I'm just kind of spreading them on there on the ground itself. Not again going for full coverage, but just getting it out there. Then while it's still wet, I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade, dark brown, and rinse the brush, and then using a lot of Agrax. And then I'll take a little bit of Nuln Oil, and again, rinse the brush, and just kind of drop it in a couple places. And I don't think there's really a way to overdo this when you're going for this gross factor. I think the colors will just kind of blend and do what they're going to do. And then the last thing I'll do is, with a very clean rinse brush, we'll take some Druchii Violet. And this, just give a coat across the worms. Then when this is done, go ahead and black your rims and give these also a coat with a satin seal. And when we come back, I'll show you the last step to to make these things gross. And if you hadn't noticed from the first part of the video, this is going to involve some Nurgle's rot. Okay, crafters, so here we go. We've got our black rings on there, cleaned up the bases. We've got the sealant on them, so they're looking nice and wet and gooky. And I've got our last step here. So again, we're going back to the Citadel Nurgle's Rot. And we're not putting a lot of it on these bases because they've already got the grossness factor going on. But one of the things we're going to do is anywhere we have these big spore looking things, I put a splotch of it right in the middle of him. Not a lot, just enough to put a goopy mess there. Now the other thing I'll do is that when I put the figures into the base, one of the things is that sometimes because of the way things dry or the thickness of the paint, the lacquer, whatnot, the figures won't fit completely into the footsteps I've made for them. So when I put a figure in, if they don't fit, I'll take the figure back up and I'll take a little bit of the Nurgle rot and I'll run it around the outside of the footprints before I glue the figure back down again. And what this does is it makes it kind of fills in the crack and fills in the gap, and it makes it look like the ground is getting really squoosh and gross and it's squishing up where they're standing. So I mean, that's the look I'm going for. Now you may notice that on the outer edges there's less color than there is in the middle. The other idea is that with my Death Guard, at least the way I do it, they're taking the filth with them as they walk. So it's kind of like a traveling filth as they move. So the ground is corrupted as they walk across it. So sometimes as they walk past, it starts to clear up a little bit. At least that's it in theory. So your mileage may vary. You're going to do what you want. This is how I do my bases. So we're going to let this dry. We're going to come back. I've got a couple figures that I've already got done and based. And we're going to take a look at them on their bases and see how this looks in practice and on the table. So we'll be right back. Alright, crafters, here we are, a group of my Death Guard with these gross, disgusting bases. Got a couple poxwalkers with the simple bases here. Just a little bit of pox on the ground, walking through the sludge. Looks great, nice and looking for them figures. Along with it, we've got our Lord of Corruption and this wonderful base. Threw an orc jaw on there, and we got big worms. He's just gross, and got that Nurgle rot around his feet. And then a couple troops. These are most of my kill team, actually. And then you can see the worms and the slime, and these just look just so foul and wretched, and it really works. You put these guys on the board and people are just like, what in the hell is going on with those guys? So I've actually had people pick up the figures and look at them and be like, this is nasty, I don't want to fight these. So looking at the worms, here's the big thing. You can use them in a lot of different ways. You can hang them, actually hang a little bit off the base. You can have them up and poke around. In this case, I mean, his shoulder pad got messed up when I was trying to put it together. So I just drilled it out and have one of the worms boring right out of his shoulder. So he's just part of that composted gugh that he's walking through. I mean, these are gross, they're nasty, they're disgusting, and they're wonderful. And if you're a Nurgle player, this is the effect you're going for. So, everybody, thanks for staying with us today. I know this is our second on bases. I actually have a couple other down the line and some other really cool bases I've done, and we're going to talk about doing those as well. Thanks again for coming, and epic your board, epic your game, epic your minis. Game on!